Okay, so how is everybody? Well, I'm doing fine. Yeah, good, exhausted. We are into the first month of the semester. And it's, I guess, exam season, likely. It's 5 tests this week. Well, I hope that you have carved out some time to do this exam. It's been open since last Thursday and is open now, so you can definitely take it on your own time. So just some housekeeping things before we get started into the question and answer part of the review. The quizzes, mainly the main announcement I have is that the quizzes from chapters 1 through 4 and chapter 15, in addition to the discussion posts for chapter 4 only, because it's our first disordered chapter, that is due the same day as the exam. So like I've said in the syllabus, all the due dates are grouped. So it's one due date for all of the different assignments for this past month. In this way, you guys can do it in your own time, and it allows some forgiveness for if you missed like one exam for 1 week. You can always catch up. So that is that. Like I said, the exam has been open. So yeah. Does anybody have questions about that? The due dates. Also, if you've taken the syllabus quiz, if you got 100% on that, you'll get 2 extra credit points for the exam. That'll be calculated into the score when I submit it onto Blackboard. So your score that you see on Blackboard will be the final score, including those 2 extra credit points. The exam is open until September 30th, 11:59. Yes, just because I made a mistake in my announcements. So this exam will be open until 11:59. What that means is that at 11:59, I will close people out of the exam if you are still taking it. So what I highly suggest is that you start taking the exam well before 11:59. So don't wait till 11, because you will only get an hour's worth of time instead of the whole hour 15. Maria, do you have a question?
Oh, yes, I just had a question about feedback from that discussion post. When we'll get that, just so we have an idea how we're doing for the next post.
Yeah, so you'll get feedback on the discussion posts this week. I will start grading them tonight after this review. But mind you, we have about I think 85 people in the class. So in an effort to get to bed on time for myself, I will likely be grading them throughout the week.
Okay, great.
So soon. You will get it before I want to say before the end of the week, but well before the time that you would need to write the other discussion posts.
Okay, fair. Thank you.
Okay. After you complete the exam, do you get the grade right back right away or after the Thursday? Just like the discussion posts, kind of in line with Maria's question, I'm going to start grading things today. I typically grade things the exam week. Sometimes I get to it ahead of time, but I start officially grading with intention during the exam week. So you might get the exam right back if it just happens to coincide when you take the exam and I'm also grading at the same time, but I wouldn't expect to get the exam grade right away. I would say give me at least until the weekend after, because again, mind you, I have about 85 students and the extra credits are open responses, so I read everything. But generally, I grade things pretty quickly. Okay, So any other questions about kind of the logistics of this week or the logistics of the course generally? I've gotten some emails from students asking about the, basically telling me the movie that they're going to be writing their essay on. So thank you for doing that ahead of time. I've documented it. If you've sent me an email and I have not responded, it's because it got lost in the 10,000 emails that I receive daily. So if I haven't responded and said that I've documented that you've emailed, just email again. And apologies for that. Kiara, the test does all of the test questions that go into the required test questions, those are all multiple choice. The extra credit is technically short answer, but don't let that worry you. It's not really like, I'm not asking for like a huge paragraph. I think the max I ask is like maybe like 2 sentences or like a little bit. So, and it's also extra credit. So all of the test questions that you are required to do, or that officially count towards your grade and doesn't just add on to it, those are multiple choice. All right. Okay, so I guess that's all the questions for logistics and housekeeping. Now I'd like to open up the session to any questions that you guys might have about the material or any questions about content, any clarification questions that you guys need. This is the time. So everybody is prepped for the exam. No questions.
Can you explain more about false positive and false negative?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what Kiara is asking about is sensitivity and specificity. So does anybody want to take a stab at it first before I go into it? Okay, so can someone tell me what sensitivity is? Okay, so Lana is saying a false positive is when you claim to have a disorder, but you truly do not. So I want you to be careful about the vocabulary used. Yeah, so it's not so much that you claim. So when it comes to false positives and false negatives, those are, yes, diagnosis is a better word. Those tend to do with like screening tests or tests that like scales that you might use to help a clinician diagnose a disorder. And so a false positive is when a screening test diagnoses you with the disorder, but you don't actually have the disorder. And so what would that fall under, sensitivity or specificity? So sensitivity is asking the right questions. In what way, Tausif? Okay, so let's just talk about sensitivity and specificity generally. What is the purpose of it? Why does that matter? Okay, we care about sensitivity and specificity. Yes, it's useful for screening. What are we screening for? For an illness, for various disorders, yes. So basically what we are looking for is we would like to accurately diagnose an illness or a disorder. And so in order to accurately diagnose it, we need to determine who has the disorder correctly. So basically have true positives, which is sensitivity. Basically saying that this person has a disorder and then they actually do have that disorder. We also want to know the people that do not have the disorder. We want to accurately diagnose them saying that they don't have the disorder. So true negatives. And that's specificity. And so basically the flip side of it is if you have a false positive, like Lana was saying, it's when the screening test diagnoses a person with a disorder, but they don't actually have it. And so what would a false positive do to either sensitivity or specificity? If there's more false positives, what would that do to the sensitivity level? Does anybody have any thoughts to that? If you have more false positives, what happens to the sensitivity level?
Wouldn't that like mix diagnose?
Sorry, Catherine, can you repeat that?
Wouldn't that like affect a diagnosis or like?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would affect the diagnosis in the fact that you're giving a wrong diagnosis.
Yeah, like, yeah, given the wrong, because the sensitivity you're like screening to see, you know, what's wrong with a person. So I don't know. I'm really trying to find this the chapter. Can somebody like tell me what chapter is that? Sensitivity.
I believe it should be chapter 3.
Chapter 3. Yes,
Yeah.
I was looking at 4
Yeah.
for some reason. Thank you guys.
Yeah. So Talsif is saying that the sensitivity is low because it's inaccurate. Basically, yes. If you have a screening test that gives you a lot of false positives, it doesn't have very good sensitivity. The sensitivity will be low because sensitivity is a test's ability to look at the true positives. So if you have a lot of false positives, it's not a very good sensitive, it's not a very sensitive test, right? Okay. And so now let's talk about false negatives. What is a false negative? If a false, yes. So Talsif is saying a false negative is they have a diagnosis, but the test says that they don't. That's a false negative. And so if specificity is the ability to look at true negatives, what would false negatives do to the specificity? Yes. So Jasmine's saying that it would lower it as well. So the specificity would go down if they are too many false negatives. All right. Did that answer, who asked that question? Did that answer your question?
Yes, it makes more sense now. Thank you.
Okay. So Tausif is saying in summary, no. So you're saying sensitivity is checking if they have the disorder and specificity is checking for which one. No. So sensitivity and specificity don't look at which disorder it is at all. That's kind of a given. Like you're not, let's see, if we are looking at whether or not somebody has anxiety disorder. So we have BAI, the Beck Anxiety Inventory. And above a certain threshold, it says if you score 8 or higher on the items, then you likely have an anxiety disorder. So that's just looking at the disorder itself. Sensitivity is going to say, if the test has high sensitivity, that means the people that had or have anxiety disorder are going to be diagnosed correctly. Specificity says the people that don't have the disorder are going to be identified correctly. So basically, sensitivity looks at people that have the disorder. Specificity looks at people that don't have the disorder. And both of those go into accurately diagnosing people, whether they have it or don't have it. All right. Any other questions?
I have a question. It's not exam related.
Okay.
On chapter 4, I know we have to like write a discussion, and I saw that we were talking about the some social disorder. I literally forgot the name of it. But
Social
it's
anxiety disorder?
yes, social anxiety disorder. And I'm pretty sure my sister has it because of the way it was described when she was little, and till today it's like a big challenge for her. She gets anxiety whenever she has to go to like do something. Like for example, when she was really little, around the ages of like 12 to 16, my family and I would like to go to Peruvian restaurants to eat, and because of her we would have to eat in the car because she felt like people would look at her and the way she ate. She would think that people are staring at her and judging her. And when we eat, I didn't pay attention to my plate. I don't pay attention about my surroundings. Even when I'm outside, she tells me that girl gave you a dirty look. I'm like, really? Because I didn't pay attention. Like it's like, no, she was looking bad at you and I looked bad at her. And I'm just like, okay, well, thanks for defending me with your looks, with the eye look. I mean, and like when my mom wants me to go buy something at the supermarket, she always like counts on me because she knows that if she tells my little sister, who's 18, she won't do it because she won't come out of the car. She's like, I'm not gonna go. So I guess I was like, could I use that as a like a story for the discussion? Because I didn't know like what to write about. So
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I know it can be, sharing personal details about your life it takes a lot of courage to do that. So thank you for doing that. Yes, you could definitely talk about that in terms of the discussion posts. And what I would like you to do is frame it within what you've learned through the chapter. So just like what you did,
yeah.
And even more so, like clearly define where the distress and impairment is. So I kind of already gave it to you, but something to note in the exam and just generally, like when it's very easy to say like, oh, I have anxiety and like this is exactly what it is. But I want you guys to really understand that psychological disorders or some of the disorders that are diagnosable in the DSM really boil down to requiring 2 elements, and that is significant distress and functional impairment. And so what you described, I want you to kind of think about the different aspects that you just described, and I want you to identify which parts are the distress and where is the functional impairment.
Okay. I will definitely put that in the discussion as my notes, because I really loved the chapter 4. I was like, I learned a lot, but I'm just like, I don't know like discussions usually it's like you like ask questions and I'm like she says stories or like reactions, so I'm like maybe she'll like count it and give me points if I use that and put those things together. So yeah, that was my question, which
Okay.
seems perfectly like I'm gonna use it because I'm like it was just really interesting to learn because I thought she was just weird. I really thought I'm like, okay, you're kind of weird, but
Yeah. No, and I'm glad that that was your experience reading the chapter, and that's exactly what I hope that you guys gain from this course, is that rather than just say like, oh, okay, that's a little weird, maybe deep dive into kind of understanding and getting a little bit more empathy for, the struggles that people that have various disorders go through. And mind you, like, it doesn't sound like your sister has ever been officially diagnosed with anything. So that also, you want to clarify that or like make that as a caveat, because we
would that
can't just
be
go around diagnosing people. Like
yeah,
that's,
right, of
we
course,
want to
but
be
would that
cautious
be
about that.
like a false positive? It sounded like or because like she doesn't have it or she does have it. What would that
Well,
like?
that's it. Has she ever gone to see a actual like clinician
No.
for,
I told
so
her
then
to. I'm like,
you
yo,
can't say false positive or negative there because she's never actually gone to
right.
be diagnosed. And so false positive, false negative, true positive, those only come in when you're trying to diagnose something.
Oh, okay, makes sense.
Yeah. All right. For the discussion post, how long should it be? There's no specific answer to that, Stephanie. It should be as long as it needs to be to demonstrate that you understand the disorder. If you can do that in one sentence, I am very impressed. But it does not need to be like 3 pages long or that long, because like some people have written poems and, a length of a poem, and that was sufficient. And some people have drawn a picture and, had one sentence, but they have a picture. So just as long as you, or as much that you need to do to show that you understand the disorder.
Hi, Professor. I have one question.
Yes.
So there's one confusion because was I supposed to diagnose the person? Because I wrote a story about my friend and she was diagnosed by a doctor. So I just wrote about that. It's not like I was doing it for her. So
No,
was that okay?
that's perfectly fine. I actually do not want you guys to diagnose your friends and family. That is something that we have to be very careful. Now that we're in psychopathology, like there is this phenomenon when students start learning about abnormal psychology. It's like, oh my God, my sister has this, or my friend definitely has this. And the diagnosing should be left to medical health professionals. So I'm not asking you to diagnose your friends or your sister or family members. So if she was diagnosed by somebody and you felt comfortable sharing that, thank you for sharing that. Because again, like sharing personal experiences can be personal. So yeah, don't diagnose people. And if you are talking about friends or family and personal or your own experience and you have not received or they have not received a diagnosis, I would appreciate just clarifying that, because we don't want to over pathologize what actually is normal. And that's a big theme of this chapter, especially chapter 1, or sorry, module, especially chapter 1 talks about, what is quote abnormal.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. And one more question. How you expect us to reply to someone else post? Like, can you give me an example? Like,
I something more than just like, wow, that's cool, or yes, I agree. It should be like you read someone's post, you thought about it, and you have something meaningful to say to them. I know that's not very clear, but yeah.
it doesn't have to be long, right? It just have to like whatever.
It doesn't have to be extremely long, but I will be looking for, not just like cool, like I'm looking for meaningful interaction. And this is the best that we can do given that we are like remote, basically.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I'm seeing that people are raising their hands. So I don't know who raised their hand first, but Antella, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I'm asking about the essay, the Hollywood essay, the movie. What type of movie do we have? Any kind, or we have to look at for like movie they have disorders inside them?
So it's easier to write your essay on a movie that has a psychological disorder in them because that's the assignment. I would ask that you write your essay about a movie that has a psychological disorder. Otherwise you get into like you're diagnosing it yourself, and I don't think that is going to be a very good essay.
Yeah.
On the PDF, I believe I have listed out many different types of movies that you can choose from. If there's one that's not on the list that you really found compelling, feel free to email me and like describe basically what the disorder is, and I can or may not approve it.
Okay, that means that those are in Blackboard.
Yes, the file describing the movie, the Hollywood movie, is on Blackboard.
Okay, thank you so much.
Jasmine, do you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just wondering if you could discuss a little bit about etiology from the biological perspective and the psychological perspective, because I figured like with the biological perspective, it deals with heredity, but like wouldn't there be some point of psychological like point of view that goes into that too? Like how are they separate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So are you talking about etiology generally or specific to anxiety disorders?
I guess that's a good question. I guess maybe generally, but then if you could also explain it with the anxiety as well.
Okay. So etiology, when it comes to biological, I guess the biological component of etiology, that is specifically talking about biology. So your genes, genes / like how you were raised. So there's like when it comes to etiology and biological research, can someone tell me the types of studies that we do to look at heredity rates for disorders? So it involves typically two people that share a lot of genes. Yes, Housef is saying twin studies. So we look at twin studies to give us information about the biological components. And so again, it looks at genes. When it comes to the psychological aspect, we consider like, remind me, was Psych 101 a prerequisite for this course?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so in Psych 101, do you remember like learning about behaviorism, like Pavlov's dog, etc.?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you remember like the other psychological theories? So like psychodynamic with like Sigmund Freud?
Yeah, it's familiar.
Okay, so basically the psychological component of etiology has to do with those types of theories. So like psychodynamic theory states that, you like the Oedipus complex of like, your family dynamics, like you want to like have sex with your parent, like of the opposite sex. Like, so that kind of comes in as like a theory that frames how this order came about. So I think in terms of anxiety disorder, Sigmund Freud did like a lot of studies and basically talked about like neuroses that people had, dreams. So that's kind of one of them. Another type is behaviorism, where depending on what happens, you learn something, and then how you learn it kind of perpetuates a cycle of things. So for example, if you go outside and you like are faced with some, this is gonna be like a very stretched example, but if you like go outside and you see someone get shot right in front of you, and it somehow triggers like, oh my God, like some trauma, like you're gonna learn, oh, maybe going outside is really dangerous. And so you're not gonna wanna go outside. And that could possibly lead to agoraphobia, which is this fear of like going outside or not wanting to leave your apartment or house. So that's not genetic, that's not biological, that's a learned experience. And so that's kind of the difference between like biology and like the psychological aspects. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay. And then just to kind of really bring this point home, we think about disorders through what's called a biopsychosocial construct. And so when I see patients, I ask them like a very like detailed interview so that I can understand them as a person, because everybody has different genetics, everybody has different biology. Also, everybody has different life experiences, so the psychological component, and then also everybody has different social experiences. And so what we do as clinicians is we take everything together, and that leads to ultimately to a diagnosis. And so that's kind of where this like etiology comes from, is that say you have two people that present with anxiety, and one of them has family history of anxiety and depression throughout their family. So their mom had anxiety and depression, so their maternal aunts, they all had it. Compared to another person who has had many life experiences that they say they had parents that were really invalidating throughout their life. Nothing is ever good enough, and they have to continue to strive, and just it's not good enough. So those two people may present together or present and both be diagnosed with, say, like general anxiety disorder. But one of them, the person that has like a lot of family history of anxiety, and again, this is very simplified, but the person that has a lot of family history, you're going to be able to say, okay, this person has generalized anxiety disorder, and it's likely the etiology is likely biological factors. Compared to the other person with the invalidating parents, this person has general anxiety disorder, and it's likely the etiology is because of psychological/social factors. So that's kind of where the etiology comes from. It's just understanding how to frame.
So, because I was gonna ask, like, how can you like, how do they separate that? And then you basically answered it, like the person who was, raised a certain way, like, and they get diagnosed. That's more the like the psychosocial component. But then also if it's like a genetic thing, then that's the biological component.
Yes.
So
Like, I don't want you to think over, like, I don't want to oversimplify it so much, because a lot of the time, all of the three things come in and interact.
yeah,
and it's not so clear cut.
But then could you also say, like, well, it might be too general, but could etiology be also phrased like how it manifests for that certain person, like the way the diagnosis, like the way the disorder manifests, like where it comes from, like if it's biological or if it's
that is the definition of etiology. Etiology is like what kind of causes a disorder.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, see that we've lost a couple people. So any other questions? This is your time. Example of what good and poor reliability and validity look like. Okay, so can someone tell me what reliability is?
It would be consistency,
Yes,
or
exactly.
like how well the measure produces the same result
Yes,
each
exactly.
time.
Exactly. And so we can think of this easiest as a ruler. Say you have a ruler and you measure your laptop, and the first measurement you get is 15 inches. And then you measure it, thank you, Aman. And then you measure it a second time and you get 15 inches. Third time, 15.2 inches. Would you say that that ruler is reliable? Okay. Now say you measure it 15 inches, second time, 5 inches, third time, 2 inches. Is that reliable? No. So how, like, how could you trust, like you get, you know, you're measuring the same laptop, this laptop hasn't changed, and you're getting like multiple different values. So that would be poor reliability. Just like a measure or like the BAI, an inventory. If you have somebody that is anxious and you give them a measure and it says they have severe anxiety, and then you give them a measure like 2 weeks later, nothing has changed in their life, they're still presenting as like very, very, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious. And you give them the same measure and they now are not anxious. Would you trust that measure? So that's kind of what it is, that the reliability is that the quality of trustworthiness in a measure. So for performing consistently if the thing is consistent. Validity, can someone tell me what validity is?
It measures what it's intended to measure.
Yes, exactly. Validity is, are you measuring what you're intending to measure? So if I had a measure for anxiety and I asked, what color is the sky? Or I asked, the sky is blue, yes or no? Do you think that that actually, like, does that, would that help with measuring anxiety? Okay. What about a question of, I often have hot flashes. Is that a good question to ask if somebody has, to determine if someone has anxiety? Or I often feel like my face is flushed. Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question about the sky being blue, and would you, like, basically that is not a valid question for this inventory about anxiety. And so now when we talk about the bigger picture of, if you have a item, an inventory that has 15 questions, and say you have 10 of them about the weather, and 5 of them about anxiety symptoms, would you say that that whole measure is valid? Yes or no? Yeah, exactly. Maria is saying no, because weather is unrelated. Yeah. So this is, I mean, this is a very like clear, like blatant example, but like, what happens with these measures is that you do what's called an item analysis to determine, you know, are these questions actually applicable to, you know, the thing that you're measuring. And so that's what validity is that you're trying to determine if the questions you're asking is actually going to get you to understand what you are measuring. Mm-hmm. All right, any Other questions?
I was gonna ask for the test, like, is there a certain chapter where we would have to really focus on?
I think I've split it up like all equally between the chapters. I tried to, I think there's like 60 questions. I want to say there's 60 questions. And I've done like 12 questions each. I forget how many questions there are, but basically there's an equal number of questions for each chapter. So not really. Other questions for the exam, about the class, anything? All right, well, if there are no other questions, we don't need to stay much longer. Thank you, Jasmine. Can give you the next half hour if anybody wants to go take the exam now.
I'm pretty sure you already answered this, but I think somebody asked if there's any like short questions or short answers that we have to type in.
All the questions that you have to answer that are like part of the exam and not extra credit, those are all multiple choice. The extra credit is like, I think there's like a fill in the blank and then a short answer. But the short, again, like the short answer, don't let it intimidate you. It's extra credit, first of all, and it's also shouldn't intimidate you, basically.
Okay, yeah, I know somebody typed it, but I was having like connection problems, so it was going in and out. Thank you though.
All right, well, ask this, pick only one choice. No, yeah, so the multiple choice questions only have one answer. I mean, there may be some questions that are like both A and B, and that's a choice. And so you would choose like C is both A and B and not like both A and B. That makes sense. All right, well, good luck on the exam. If you guys have any additional questions, feel free to email me. I will end it here. We've gone down to 10 people, so I think everybody has their their questions answered. I look forward to reading the discussion posts. I will try to get the grading by this weekend, if not like slightly later, but you will get your grade soon. All right, have a good rest of the night, everyone. Bye.